as an extinguished rather than a distinguished diplomat, I am most overwhelmed and humbled by the sheer aura, the spiritual aura in this room today. I have not seen this kind of energy in any single room with the presence of so many distinguished spiritual personages here. I can only bow in the utmost humility to all of you and pray that may the collective strength of your spiritual wisdom spread light and enlightenment to the world. Dr. Hyunjin Moon and Mr. Jim Flint of the Global Peace Foundation, Swami Chidananda Saraswati ji, Mr. Marsudi Shuhud, and Padma Shri Agus Indra Udiana ji, as well as all the other distinguished spiritual as well as public leaders who are here for this distinguished meeting. Let me express to all of you the sense of honor I feel to participate in today at this high-level plenary. The object is, of course, to advance the theme of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam along the fourfold action track of value-based peace building, environment, education, and national youth empowerment. India's C20 chair, Her Holiness Mata Amritanandamayi Ma, or Amma, whom you've just heard recently, embodies the very spirit and principle of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Over the years, she has addressed issues such as the protection of the environment, the inculcation of universal values of compassion, inclusiveness, and harmony at most of the international forums, including at the UN. We all know that the spirit of one earth, one family, one future has long been an integral part of Indian society, shaped by our traditions and value systems, rooted in our religious and spiritual practices. It is the bridge that connects the individual consciousness with the consciousness of the larger universe. While it typifies the values we imbibe, it is an expression of our common humanity. This year, under the C20 aegis, more than 14 working groups will consider a range of issues of priority concern to the international civil society and come up with a whole series of policy recommendations for the G20. As a civilization, India's record of external engagements has been generally peaceful. While we have been the object of external predatory actions, we have rarely ourselves engaged in wars outside the subcontinent except under the colonial flag. This is mainly because our collective greed or grievance was never so great as to provide an excuse for such egregious violence. More than 2 decades ago, Francis Stewart, writing on the roots of violent conflict, said that 8 out of 10 amongst the world's poorest nations were suffering or had recently suffered from large-scale violent conflict. While many of these people perceive themselves as identified within a distinct religion, ethnicity, or common culture, and see this as the primordial passion or the reason of intractable differences that each may have towards another, that is rarely the underlying reason for conflict. Rather, religion, ethnicity, or culture is often used to divert attention from more important underlying economic and political factors. Most people have multiple identities that interweave with others and can be used to rationalize either their common identity or their difference. It is the group motives of resentment, ambition based on geography, class, or economic greed or grievance that provides the basis for war. At the Inception Conference in Nagpur just last month, One statement impressed me a great deal. That was made by Mr. Owain James, of the Global Director of the 100 Million campaign under the Kailash Satyarthi Children Foundation. Mr. Owain underlined the double standards practiced by many countries, even of the G20 today. He recalled in particular the exploitation, exclusion, and injustice African states are facing. The world, for long, he said, has been ignoring the scale and severity of this crisis. As Mr. Owain saw, it is the injustices that trapped families and nations in cyclic poverty, forced children out of school and into child marriages or child labor. He said, millions of children in Africa under the age of 5 die every year, which is due to actually preventable causes. During the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, the world helped businesses and people in rich countries, but left the most vulnerable to fend for themselves. Only 0.13% of the $12 trillion released as COVID aid globally was allocated to low-income countries. The emergency IMF special drawing rights gave $2,000 per European child and $60 for African children. This continued and institutionalized subjugation of Africa, he said, was appalling and had to end. If this has to be a Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, this is a problem that must be addressed. The good news is that there are powerful and proven solutions, such as direct social protection for children. That they work can be seen in examples of the Bolsa Familia in Brazil, the midday meal system in India, and the cash transfers in Ghana and Uganda. Universal social protection systems such as pension programs in Kenya and Tanzania and social protection flows can be strengthened and could actually make all the difference. Emergency social protection to help the poorest families during COVID have worked wonders. In February this year, at the Voice of the Global South Summit, the Indian Prime Minister had this to say: "We, the Global South, have the largest stakes in the future. 3/4 of humanity live in our countries. India has always shared its development experience with the Global South. Our development partnerships cover all geographies and diverse sectors. We supplied medicines and vaccines to over 100 countries during the pandemic. India has always stood for a greater role for developing countries in determining our common future." In a real sense, India is also the mother of democracies around the world. Democracy in India is ingrained in our traditions and can be traced back to ancient India, to the Vaishali region, as well as to the Ganarajas of ancient India, or to the Chalukyas of what is called today Karnataka. During the early years of our independence, even though there was much skepticism and disbelief outside India about our commitment to democracy, we have always been convinced in the strength, stability, and permanence of our participative decision-making that was part of our political functioning since independence, even before independence, in fact. What is the basis of this? The father of the Indian Constitution, Mr. B.R. Ambedkar, whose birth anniversary we celebrate tomorrow, drew an important distinction between independence for the country and independence for its people. To Ambedkar, an independent India meant little if it was just a transfer of power from one set of masters to another, if it did not assure rights to all Indians as individuals. In this respect, in fact, Ambedkar was even a little different from the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, because Mahatma Gandhi's democracy meant Ram Rajya, with the village as the foundation of social transformation. To Ambedkar, it had to be based unambiguously on the constitutional guarantees of the rights to every individual as individual, And this, I just recall when we discussed recently on Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam as meaning we are one family under God. That, the basis of that is the recognition of every individual's right as an absolute right to certain fundamental rights and duties too. Even today, we are witnessing monumental ramifications of this historic change of approach. In fact, just in March 28th last month, the World Summit of Democracies was commemorated in the United States, where 120 nations participated, and where, in a message from India, our Prime Minister underlined that democracy was part of India's civilizational ethos. Democracy ultimately for us also means looking at the world through the perspective of the world Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. If today we live in a consumer-driven world with increasing accessibility to and indeed excessive reliance upon technology, with diminishing human values and a deficit of compassion among young minds who are increasingly focused on materialism, the accumulative urge, and less humane approaches in our lifestyle, our masses must learn to adopt a need-based culture. Whether it is the nations of South Asia or the many regions elsewhere in the global South, we are amongst the geographical spaces today that face the highest vulnerabilities to climate change and attendant challenges. Many of our economies are ill-equipped to cope with the speed of anticipated changes and lack the magnitude of the investment needed to adapt. Yet, we do not have the option to retreat. A do-nothing strategy will not work. What we need is to reach out and cooperate with other countries, and India has, at the present, launched on a proactive approach to help actively in the countries that need them the most among the global South. That typifies our approach to Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The G20 and partner countries must develop a common aspiration to build an environment-centric economic infrastructure as well as a resilient financial system and an educational system that builds greater social responsibility, especially towards the vulnerable sections of the international community. We need a compassionate value system as emphasized by Amma and by most of the speakers, particularly of emphasizing the spiritual value of each individual, irrespective of how big, how rich, how poor he is. These are the building blocks of a truly sustainable Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. More than ever today, it is our youth who must rise to this challenge, as Swami Chidananda Saraswati just mentioned. To them, I can just do nothing more than point to the tagline of the C20. You are the light. Thank you.